Welcome to the Brain Trainer AI for Social Impact podcast. I'm Elsa from the Brain Trainer team, and I'm excited to introduce this episode featuring our hosts, Norman Maldez and Alex Teet, along with our inspiring guest, Dan Lammot, CEO and co-founder of Threshold.world. Dan is a social entrepreneur, AI innovator, and ocean activist who has dedicated his career to leveraging technology for positive global impact. As the leader behind threshold.world and World, the first AI-powered impact storytelling platform, Dan helps nonprofits harness AI to drive transparency, efficiency, and engagement in their mission-driven work. In this conversation, we dive into AI as a catalyst for social good, ethical leadership in AI deployment, and how storytelling can transform the way we approach social impact. Dan also shares his journey from his early days in banking and tech to building AI solutions that empower changemakers worldwide. This episode is packed with insights on how AI can serve humanity rather than replace it. All right, let's jump in.
Okay, welcome everyone to the first episode of 2025 of the Brain Trainer AI for Social Impact podcast. My name is Norman Valdez, and I'm here joined by Alex Dwight, who is co-host, and also our wonderful guest, Dan Lamont, who is the CEO, co-founder of Threshold World. And yeah, let's just get on it. Alex.
Yep. Again, thank you, Dan, for joining us. We usually start off to try and understand the journey of people that are operating in the space, meaning AI for social impact or various angles of it. So we're really interested in how do you end up with the focus area that you did, and especially as you're kind of focusing on how do you work with emerging technologies like AI and storytelling and how important that is. But feel free to kind of paint the picture of the journey.
I love the question. We could spend a lot of time on that because it's been a winding road, but thanks for asking it. I think I didn't realize this until many years in, but it's become the story I've told myself, and so I'll share it with you. Is that I grew up in a medical family in Southern California, close to the beach. I witnessed my dad, who was an orthopedic surgeon, walking through the grocery store, running into patients, and seeing the change that he had in those people's lives. My mom was also very involved in the business as well, and I was 100% sure in high school that I was going to be a doctor, and I wanted to work with patients. And ended up changing my mind in college, which happens to a lot of us, and there were a bunch of reasons for that. But a big part of it was that medicine was changing a lot in the 90s, still changing now, but was changing a lot then. And I wanted to see more of the world in that context of this. And so I thought international business would be a great answer because business plus culture would at least be better than just profit. So and then I ended up doing banking and then banking technology. And then from there, got into the early years of what we now call cloud computing, and ended up doing cloud for nonprofits and education and foundations. And then I've kind of been doing that for the last 16 years or so. And so today we focus a lot on storytelling as the core unit that has the potential to progress humanity and democratize learning, which you all speak a lot about. Turns out, that's not a novel idea at all. We've been telling stories since the beginning of humanity, and it is a very important part of what leads us to kind of the work we do today. But I think that's ultimately been the core of all of it. Was it started with witnessing what happened in my family, and then not planning at all on all of this kind of coming together. So here we are, and I jump out of bed every day doing what we do.
There are two big topics here. Like the name will give it, right? Brain Trainer is like AI and social impact are like the intersection. So I usually like to talk with either one of them, and I like to start with AI. I've shared before many times in many episodes how like, and when I do any presentations, I always said like this thing, like this version of AI that we're living through it is very different and unique. Specifically because of like a technology that simulates cognition, that simulates human thinking. And just like right on it because of your experiences. And yes, when I look at your profile, like AI is all over the place. So like World uses the AI as your platform. What has been like as somebody who's been in the space of technology, advanced technology, working all around the world. What has been your as a leader? What has been your experience? Your a little bit of your journey with like just artificial intelligence in how we are living it now.
First off, it's shifting every day, right? And so it's really difficult to keep up with as a technologist, and that makes it really fun. It also makes it dangerous in a lot of ways that we need to be really cognizant of. And Alex, you speak a lot about this, about inclusivity and the equity lens on it. So I'd say one of the important themes for us at Threshold is that we say anything we create needs to be a digital manifestation of our commitment to inclusivity. So that guides us in this context, in addition to our values and our mission of making it matter. But our journey, our really first foray into it was the week after ChatGPT opened up an API. And we're very lucky to have a very special partnership with Microsoft Tech for Social Impact, which focuses on supporting the nonprofit market with Microsoft technologies. So we were one of the first partners that got access to the API. And 2 weeks later, we had features in v.world with AI. First with OpenAI, which we didn't like a lot, right? We were worried about it, and we were really transparent. We published blog posts and put things in the app to make sure people knew what it was doing. But the theme that I'm trying to get at here is that we were listening a lot to the discourse, right? And both the risks and the opportunities, but we chose to experiment in the safest way that we possibly could, in the most transparent way we possibly could. Because frankly, the first thing we did, we went into ChatGPT and we said, all right, pretend that you're a program manager in Puerto Rico for a climate-related nonprofit that's focused on restoration of mangroves, right, that have been destroyed by hurricanes in the past. You don't really know a lot about this, but you're really passionate about it, and you've got a big volunteer force that is a grassroots kind of citizen scientist crew. And we kind of went on with these storylines, and we would put these prompts in there and then iterate on them, and it would bring back exceptionally well-formed logic models and log frames and program design that made us fall out of our chairs. And this was just in like the earliest version of GPT we could get our hands on. And so we shifted. As soon as we saw that work, we said, this could be one of those things that actually democratizes access to at least some of the world's knowledge of what works, like how to design effective programs and maybe tell more effective and more frequent incremental stories about the learning. And so our approach has been grounded kind of in values and transparency, because we know there's risks to it. And at the same time, while most of the market was in all the conferences that year were about responsible AI and ethical AI, and there were world-renowned experts providing really important guidance about the thematics, we were like, we need to get this in people's hands and make sure they know what they're doing so that they can not put things into it that shouldn't be out there in the training database. And they will teach us how it will save them time or help them share programmatic outputs better, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, though I can't prove, I think we were probably the first, impact program design and storytelling app in the market that had AI, because of that really special relationship with Microsoft. And it's been, we've been learning a lot about what people care about and what they don't care about and what they're worried about. And that practice, I think, has been really informative for us. And I think we'll continue to take that approach. So.
And first of all, I love serendipities, and we haven't discussed this then, but I work with international organizations around mango restoration or mango university, Generation Hope, around how do we instill agency in youth, especially in small state islands, around climate action and their understanding and stories to be told around climate change. So I really appreciate kind of the tie-in. But I want you to take a step out and you can relate it to the work that you're doing at Threshold or in a larger scope. But looking at the emerging technology that is artificial intelligence, what is the biggest challenge or risk that you see, that you feel personally, that you kind of wake you up at night? On the other side, what's the biggest opportunity aside from what you just talked about, and are there specific avenues to both avoiding the first but embracing the second?
The first thing that comes to mind is that I think the opportunity lives somewhere between, and maybe it's an and, around the themes of creativity and time. Right? And that I'll bring that back to how it relates to the work that we're doing. And I think the biggest risk is an over-reliance and an early over-reliance on those same factors, right? Because the data informs the output. And so our model for thinking through constructing AI scenarios and the applications that we build, and especially in World, are distilled into kind of three concepts, like what's the context, what's the action the user takes, because we always want the user to be in control, right? And then what's the output, and then how does that output help them do something around creativity or time. And so, when we think about, like, if I pull a feature out of World, right, the context for an impact story is all the information in the project. And it's the three key ingredients that make oxytocin and dopamine flow, which are something visual, something narrative, and something data. And there are many smarter people than me that have demonstrated that. So the context is that combination. The action is picking the kind of story you want to tell. You want to talk about a milestone, you want to talk about a challenge, a change in a participant's life, assuming you have consent to do so, and picking that story archetype. And then the output is a draft story, with an overemphasis on the word draft, right? And so the time savings is that you don't have to think about all of those things on your own, because a lot of those things that create the story are in a project in World, right? And so, and we see the same corollary in instances and other applications we build where people are trying to write fundraising proposals and so forth. So I am deeply, deeply concerned about the ethical principles. I'm very concerned about the fact, not a perception, but the fact that the models are only as good as what they have access to. And we are certain, without any unreasonable doubt, that there's bias and all kinds of other horrible stuff in that. And at the same time, I'm worried that we could be on this path where we just converge the average of the average of the average, or the most probable response connected to the most probable response connected to the most probable response. And we just end up with like vanilla ice cream everywhere, right? And so that's worrying. And I don't know the right answer of how to get past that. Like, our approach is to try to find a balance between experimentation and real practical ethical use, and then a lot of listening. But one big transition we made as soon as we could make, and this is, I think, critical, is, our apps are all built on Microsoft technologies. And so as soon as we could shift from connecting to OpenAI, to Azure OpenAI, and putting a fence around that data and retaining our commitment to not monetizing or even looking at our customers' data, because it's not ours, that at least provides a bit of a safety net for being a catalyst in a bigger equation. So, I guess in summary, it's the concerns about an over-reliance or an overconfidence in the output being suitable, and then trying to figure out how can we make these solutions accessible by genuinely saving people time. So really focusing on micro productivity enhancements that remain in their control, and still give them enough of a creative and iterative capability within it to help them feel like this is really enhancing what I can do as a human, as opposed to replacing what I can do as a human.
Yeah, I think from what you said before, and now what you just said is, in the space of within the AI space, like you talk about safety and alignment, right? Like, and at least it's like something that we have ongoing conversation with Alex. It's like we see like how AI is being developed, more emphasis on the new shiny tools and their capabilities than actually guiding or properly guiding people to take a pause and say like, okay, we gotta really understand the technology from the standpoint of this capability. Like, what is the training data? And as you said, the training data is data on people, and people, we all have our biases, we all have ways of looking at things. And so one of the things that I often see when I engage with within the work of Brain Trainer, which is around AI and education, is that there's a lot of organizations and companies who know that they see this AI thing and they want to get into it, and their employees often are, even without the organization developing an AI policy or governance structure around it, the employees will already use ChatGPT free or whatever, they pay out of their own pocket. So a lot of the times it's very ad hoc. But then on the other hand, because of the lack of, I think sometimes lack of understanding of the technology, and because it's so hard to understand, being so fast paced, it's hard to understand even for somebody who tries to follow, which is like, I would say, I count myself in. There's not even enough hours of the day to watch and read articles and watch videos of what's going on. And I think there's just general senses, the concern, which I very much align with what you're saying, is that there needs to be structures in place to guide people towards more responsible, safe use of AI. There needs to be an in between, and then from there, organize a sense of structure with governance and policies, and what is good to do and what's we don't suggest you do, things like that. And then also gonna just put into the conversation that there's the topic of worry. One of the things that I've been worrying or thinking about lately is a book that Eric Schmidt, which is the former CEO of Google, co-wrote with Henry Kissinger, called The Edge of AI in Our Human Nature. And one of the things that stood out from that book is how they argue when it comes to like looking at AI's impact into the future, as we have a tool that simulates human cognitive ability. They say that they think that people will over rely on that, and then that AI-driven systems will become more reliant on AI for decision making. They say potentially diminishing the ability for less people to think critically and independently. So that's one of the things. Like, there's always been a worry. Like, if you listen to Geoffrey Hinton, you talk about like like autonomous weapons with AI and all this like military applications. That initially, that's the thing that was in my mind. But lately, what's in my mind in terms of a worry is the over-reliance, and just like basically offloading a lot of the work 100%. Like you said, like grant writing and fundraising is one example, right? Organizations use AI to streamline the process of grant writing, which can be very time consuming, a lot of hours, a lot of days. And the difference between somebody copy pasting complete answers that, for example, ChatGPT can output, and then putting that in your application, versus understanding that it's not about that. It's about using it for brainstorming, aligning eligibility requirements with what is being asked with your organization. You can upload business plans and all of those things. That's, for example, identifying ways or areas or workflows where you can actually match those things, as opposed to saying like, no, I'm just gonna copy paste everything. There needs to be some like education, understanding, and frameworks, I think, built in place.
I think that's true, and I think also as for the application builders out there, right, the people that are deploying software that are leveraging AI, there's a real opportunity, and it's a very super simple decision to make. It's like when AI is in use, make sure the application demonstrates that. So, like in our application, if AI is used to create content, there is an indelible watermark that's left on that content, right? Like, we use different lines between things that show up on visualizations to demonstrate that, like, well, AI assisted that process, or if a story's co-authored with the assistance of AI, well, it has a watermark at the bottom you can't get rid of. And so that's not meant to say it's worse, right? But it's also not meant to say it's better. And the audience ought to be able to choose, how they feel about the content when it comes across. So I think, small feature decisions like that you can permeate through these kinds of apps can help people interpret things that more holistically in that context. And the grant writing scenario is a really good one, right? And then maybe if we spend a ton of time, if all the grant management applications go build AI to assimilate and index all of the historic grant proposals that have won versus that weren't awarded, and then you end up with great answers. Well, maybe we should be spending more time, like many people are, on like, why are we doing this in the first place, right? Like organizations like Fix the Form, which includes a lot of the grant making applications, is that 44% of the fields on grant applications in the United States and the same, why are we asking those 44 questions out of 100? Right? Like where else could we get that information? It isn't to diminish what's unique and valuable in any context, because I think we always want to leave plenty of room for that. But we can and I think should try to treat the challenges at the source the best we can to try to provide more time for people that focus on their social or environmental missions.
Pull on a few different strings in terms of your focus on storytelling and how important it is to leverage stories and use cases to educate this, especially the sector that you work with, about the use of AI, but also ask you about, are you seeing a change in how organizations are coming into the conversation and exploration? To give an example, I was advising on a venture studio that for the last 4 months, and we just had the big event that showcased nonprofit AI solutions, and it was a sprint for 4 to 5 months, and there was an MVP that each part of the cohort had. Two of the presenters, 16 and 17-year-olds, that not only proved out a concept and developed an enterprise level solution around conversational support around menstruation and like period for girls and others, and the other one being eating disorders. But the way they talked to me about prior to engaging with development was they came in and talked about equity. They came in and talked about ethics, understanding data, co-creating data. Are you seeing a change over time as more and more use cases, more and more as you're educating organizations you're working with on how to look at AI adoption, look at AI governance as you're building in and supporting adoption?
We definitely are with AI, and we're also seeing it in a much broader context with respect to technology and the shifts in technology and platforms over the course of the last 15 years or so. So we take fundraising as an example, right? 15 years ago, there were a smaller number of fundraising vendors in the market. None of them had AI, right? But they kind of created and educated the market on how could you use technology for fundraising. And then platform companies started to enter the market because they wanted to focus on industries, and they created some derivation of that. And it was the typical kind of, combative sales processes that took place. And they educated a new generation of folks. And then other platform companies came in, and over time, the platform companies tended to shift more towards the enterprise market because like it was easy, there was more profitability in those, and they're trying to fuel social missions. And ultimately now we see, with AI, there's a really big question in the market, which is like, do we need any of this stuff anyway? Like, do we need the data to be in these little boxes of tables and fields that are all normalized and so forth? And AI is really putting into question like the last 25 years of CRM at its core, right? Whether you're engaging donors or advocates or, program staff or volunteers, et cetera, because 10 years ago was if you just get it all into one platform, magic will happen and your productivity will go through the roof. You'll raise more money, you'll make more effective grants, and you'll deliver more effective programs. That promise turned out to be too hard for the humans to do because data is complicated, right? And every record represents a real human being, and human beings are complicated. And so I think with AI going, kind of coming full circle now, is it's actually putting into question all of it, as well as like what are our roles? Like if we do technology consulting with organizations, what role should AI play in that? What should be different about our jobs as data architects or as solution architects or as functional consultants, et cetera? Because I expect it will be very different in a couple of years from now. So maybe getting down to a finer point, like that's my macro view of it, is all of our roles and all of the technology that we've recommended for 15 or 16 years is in question right now. And for good reason, right? Because the intent of all of this work has been to do well and do good at the same time, and it really, our hypothesis has always been that it's an and if we can do more good through this process, ideating faster and as equitably as we can, then we really should. And so, putting it down to like a specific example, we got involved in a project recently where there is a president, a former president, it's no longer with us, that was a prolific letter writer before we had modern technology. And so this person wrote thousands of letters because that's how he communicated back in that day. Some of those letters are typed, some of them are handwritten and typed, and some of them are handwritten. And as the library is getting ready to launch, they want to create this incredible, accessible experience where people can feel some level of closeness to the president, who did great things for the United States. And so what we did, this part of this project, was we leveraged technology to teach it how to read all those letters. And we did something in 6 weeks that would have taken years and years and years and years to do. But we couldn't have done it if it weren't for the experts that actually created the base model, who actually read enough letters to train it. So, so the whole idea behind that project was to provide equitable access to information that was in that president's mind between all these other world leaders at that time, at that point in time, so that we would not make the same mistakes, right? And so the hope is that by democratizing access to that information, that will help us improve the course of history at a time when arguably we need that kind of grounding. So I really like that example, and it was our team trips over themselves to get to work on those kinds of projects. Right? They love it, and honestly, like we kind of joke about it, but it has in many ways sort of brought the magic back to building systems, right? And that has been really fun to watch our team kind of flourish around those kinds of ideas.
I'm gonna throw a little bit on the fundraising part again, and I'm gonna put it within the context of what's going on in Canada, United States. Of course, we had just the tariffs being imposed yesterday on the 25% Canada, and just having spoken to organizations that work with organizations in the United States, with the defunding happening with the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk. I wanted to get a sense from you and within the topic of what is happening right now with that, and like fundraising and the need to get resources to fulfill missions and the things that are social impact activities that are very necessary, especially now. Wanted to ask about what are you seeing right now in terms of how things are changing just politically in where you are from your vantage point, in how that potentially just will put higher strain on organizations to think even much deeper about fundraising. And we are about to have a change in federal government here in Canada as well. So we're also thinking how that new government also potentially maybe even follow suit in cutting corners and cutting funding and all stuff. Yeah, how do you see like the view from the vantage point about the need for fundraising and the need and what is happening right now with the organizations that you engage in, what struggles?
I'm watching this very closely. Now, I'll first say I have nothing but empathy for the humans that are going through, separation from agencies and organizations and causes and communities that they have dedicated their lives to. I know many of those people. Many of my team members know many of those people. And I, for the sake of clarity, I don't like the way this is playing out at all. And I don't support it, and I don't agree with it, and it's not okay with me personally. I do think there are always opportunities to gain efficiencies, but when they're exercised without humanity, it doesn't do anybody any good, right? I think that the only experience I can really draw on, because it's a very dynamic situation, right? There's news even just before we came on about our two leaders talking about something today. Don't know what, hopefully about resolving some of the challenges that are really being caused by decisions on the southern side where I am. But I'd like to see I'd like to see if the public mobilizes the way it did the last time that President Trump was in office. So I was in a different company, but doing similar things then, right? Supporting nonprofits and healthcare institutions and education. There were other major events, like mobilization events that took place at that time. There was, George Floyd's murder, the Me Too movement, the Women's March. There was a public outcry that was louder than what we're seeing in the United States at the moment. But what we saw with our customers, which were mostly either progressive or central leaning organizations, is the public mobilized in support of them. So we ended up being actually growing very fast when similar changes were imposed, because the public said, this is not okay with us, and we're going to support the causes and organizations that are trying to counterbalance these kinds of cultural and power shifts that are taking place. We haven't seen that yet, but it's only been 6 weeks, right? And so I think we're watching closely to see how it plays out for organizations. And maybe as a final point, we have customers that are very exposed to the dismantling of USAID and the freezing of funds, which the Supreme Court said is illegal earlier today, thankfully, right? We have some customers that are partially exposed to domestic funding freezes. And then we have some that are totally outside of the scope of that and have very diversified income streams and are feeling lots of empathy for their colleagues. If there's, I'm an optimistic person. I've said to a couple of our team members, like, this is a moment where you wish that either you or others that have a lot of extra resources would step up quickly, right? There is an unbelievable amount of talent available on the marketplace right now, an unbelievable thousands of individuals with deep experience, lots of practical understanding of what reality is on the ground all over the world. And those people are looking for new places to deploy that kind of expertise. Like, they don't want to go take a commercial job somewhere. Like and I don't want to overgeneralize either, right? But if there's, if there was a call to action out there, and I know there are some groups that are really mobilizing around this, and I some of that's in the news, a lot of it's happening quietly right now. But if that talent, because, my personal view, and I think our company's view, is that our best chance of solving some of these challenges, or at least accelerating a path during our lifetimes and leaving it in a place where the next generation can go after the solution, is to support the people that are doing the work, right? The problems are created by people. They're going to be solved by people. Like, the planet will be here with or without us, right? They will. The forests will be here with or without us. It's really up to us to determine whether we want to be good stewards, per David Attenborough's kind of statement around. It's up to us. And we get to decide. And unfortunately, right now, there are a smaller number of people with a lot of power and a lot of resources, I think, making very, very selfish decisions that are going to continue to have a lot of impact on a lot of people that don't have a voice. And that's not where we should be as humanity.
And I just wanted to lean in on that a little bit. Like, you mentioned earlier that we run the risk, or we are in a position, right, and where we end up with vanilla ice cream everywhere. And you just talked about the lack of diversity in voices. You obviously have a long history of working with nonprofits in the US, but you're in Costa Rica. You work across the world. As we're even before USAID was. Well, we'll see what happens, but it happens ultimately. But even before what happened with the USAID, the international development agencies all across the world, they're not at the point where they understand AI, data, knowledge mobilization in general. So we do have a very Western oriented, both because that's where the money is, but also we don't have diversity in voices. So in your opinion, when we have such a big gap, especially when we're looking at globally diverse voices, often what you leaned into earlier, where you have cultures that sit on oral tradition of storytelling, that's not as easy to get into data sets so that we can be diverse. if you had a magic wand, what are some of the bottlenecks to unlock some of that? And obviously, we're right now heading in the opposite direction, but in that is a lot of opportunity, like you said. Without that be on a state level, philanthropic level, there is now a counterweight starting to collaborate. What's that magic one from your perspective, both in terms of the ecosystem overall, you as an organization, you as an individual? What's the different type of magic wands that you can imagine?
Specifically in the context of AI or more generally, Alex, what?
AI, data, knowledge
Yeah.
mobilization, but you could lead into community empowerment overall because they're obviously
Yeah.
all interconnected, but from
Yeah.
those angles.
I think I have a hope, like, is maybe the way I'll couch it, is that as we've felt really lucky to work in this sector for all these years, and one of the things that is really different from banking and other places where I came from is this: there is competition certainly for resources and fundraising, but by and large, most of the people that do this kind of work, but perhaps the three of us included, are here because our identity is really associated with the kind of work we do, and as a result of that, there's this joy that we find in sharing what we do, right? And I think that's why storytelling is so compelling in this context. And so I think that there's a real opportunity to disintermediate ourselves from that storytelling process. Many people have tried this, right, by creating kind of living learning communities and so forth. But when it's done in the context of trying to solve a specific challenge, I think we can see outsized gains. To the extent that there isn't an ulterior motive to try to monetize or take advantage of that information, and that has to be given right from the start. Like, it has to be trustable or trusted. Otherwise, people won't go for it. Um, Many of the humans that work in our space make tremendous sacrifices. You know, some might argue most, right, in terms of income, access to other resources, et cetera. And so the one thing that one of the things that they get that you don't get in a lot of the other commercial spaces is the joy of just knowing that your life mattered more, right? Like you actually got to make it matter. And whether that's, school age teachers or restoring mangroves, or had an amazing call with an organization in Puerto Rico that's restoring the coral reefs here earlier today. There's just joy in it. And so my hope is that that AI can be an assistant in helping more of that knowledge become accessible, to the extent that the consent mechanisms are there to allow for it, right? And that it will be accessible in such a way where that stuff that's in everybody's heads about, like, what works under what context, with, and what choices should be made or shouldn't be made in specific context, that could become accessible. I think it's a big challenge though, Alex, right? And one of the questions we've asked ourselves a lot, like thinking about our technology with B.World, is a lot of the attention in the market goes to solutions and initiatives that are supposed to focus on a very specific challenge, like access to water, right? Or education for a specific group of people or a specific location. Because it's easy to get your hands around that, right? Like, it's easier to, and we see money in the US from a donation perspective over the last many years shifting more towards restricted giving, because the people with the resources want to participate, or at least they want to be informed and they want to know where it's going, instead of general unrestricted funds, which is it's like perpetuating the whole starvation cycle to the nth degree. And I don't think that's a healthy thing. But ultimately, I think that if there's a disintermediation of the knowledge, then and like organizations like us that aren't focused on one specific challenge, we're focused on the people who are trying to solve the problem, right? The people that are getting creative and trying to find the solutions and want to share those solutions with each other. That's a problem worth working on for a decade or two, to the extent that we can sustain that.
We just watching the time, and we have just two final itching questions that we would like to go over, and then we're gonna we're gonna wrap up. But yeah, like all the guests that we have here, usually just we already know, like, we can just keep talking more because there's so many areas of you that you just don't have the time to cover. Just a little addition to like sort of the question is from my vantage point, there's an opportunity that sometimes big companies don't realize that they would have if they were to be more inclusive with their technology, with the people that get engaged in shaping the technology. And I'm from Peru originally, so I speak Spanish as well. So the I'm trying to make some people aware that if we were to just infuse our more of a Latino worldview into the models, could be an open source model that we can do that on. That model, as a result of that intentionality of ensuring that it has this worldview, it's not just the language, it's the worldview. It could actually be more beneficial for people because it's more, let's say, more attuned to a specific group that is trying to support. So given that, transition into that, the question that I wanted to ask is, because it would be good to hear from your word as a CEO of Threshold, is like, when we can read the website, we can read the landing page to get all this information. But from your perspective, like what is the work that Threshold does, just for people who don't even know at this point? And if you can just talk a little bit about the B-World platform and what is your hope to do now, and then maybe if you can share anything about what you're hoping to do with it in the future, as you know, entertain new functions or new capabilities, perhaps.
Well, I feel very lucky to be part of the Latino worldview, or at least a spectator. Like I'm the only non-Latino in our family, which I consider a gift. My better half, my partner Lena, is Puerto Rican, and both our kids were very intentionally born in Puerto Rico, and we live in Puerto Rico now. And half of our company is based in Puerto Rico, and so it's really a gift to be able to work with a very mixed culture team. I was lucky enough to grow up in Southern California, and where I had many friends that were either from Mexico or had Mexican heritage, and so it's always been important to me. And I'm also very lucky to be fluent in Spanish because I've had to work hard on it twice, because I learned Mexican Spanish growing up, and then when I first visited Puerto Rico, I realized that it was very different Spanish, and I had to learn Puerto Rican Spanish. So I think, I share all of that as a personal story because it's really important to us. Most of Lena's career was in some form of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Like her job before helping to co-found this company was that. So it's been ingrained in us from the start. And partially as evidence of that, it's a lot easier if you're building an application to make the decision from the outset to make it multilingual and multicultural. It's a lot harder to do that in version 2 or 3 or 4. And so Alex Norman, who you met at the dinner last week, we built multilingual and multi-currency in from the start, right? And that's really important to us. So, BDOP is available in English and Spanish, specifically because we have a duty to participate in improving the lives and livelihoods of people that are part of our home in Puerto Rico, but also because it's not cool to just deliver like social impact technology in English all over the world and just expect everybody to use it that way. The terms are different. And it isn't about like nuance. There are hard differences. Like it isn't, and then a lot of terms don't translate because there aren't equivalents culturally between cultures. So I wouldn't say we're perfect by any measure at that, but at least we're aware of that fact and we try to work on it consistently. And BDOP is it is an experiment, right, for us. It's a critical part of our vision as a company, but the experiment is based on the hypothesis that if some measure of the 300 million or so people around the world that are doing either social impact or nonprofit related work didn't use spreadsheets to design and implement and measure the progress of programs, that we actually can make some more progress. And that's it, right? And when you go out to some of the most unbelievably data-driven nonprofits in the world, like most of that part of their operation will run in some form of a spreadsheet. Sometimes there's a reason for that. Like, and I acknowledge that. Like sometimes you can't use a digital device because it creates a risk. And so I put the asterisks and the parentheses around all of those kinds of scenarios. But our hypothesis has been that if you if you could help people design more effective programs now with AI, if you help them with the temperature on the AI turned all the way down to actually get factual representations of complex data, that's a data equity consideration. And then if you could help them express the progress or learning or both more easily in a way that they're entirely in control over and that nobody's trying to monetize, that knowledge would travel more readily. And from a business perspective, I and we came into this with quite a lot of guilt, to be honest with you. And the story behind that is that the 10 years before we started doing this, we basically were working with wealthy organizations, right? Like organizations that had at least one tech person, right? And some of them had huge technology departments and cybersecurity officers, et cetera. And so, we were almost like perpetuating, not that those causes aren't deserving of great technology, but what about the 98% of other organizations? What about them? And so we made a very intentional decision early on. We said we have to follow SaaS principles. We need to make this consumer grade design, and we need to make it as cheap as we possibly can, right? That doesn't sink us as an organization. And those three things should help more people gain access to it. And then we need to build a sustainable business model that isn't reliant on the revenue from that for a long time, so that we can make bad business decisions to try to see if this hypothesis is going to actually play out to the benefit of everybody. And thus far, 6 years in, we're holding real steady doing that. So my vision for it is I would hope, like my magic wand, going back to yours, Alex, is I don't wake up every day to be a CEO, right? Like we at Threshold, I get the most joy out of working with our team and with our customers and trying to solve really hard problems and trying to give people time back and afford them the grace that they deserve given the wicked challenges that they face. So the magic wand for me would be that not just us, but the bunch of people that are working on trying to solve this problem for the people who are trying to solve the problem, that somebody would step up with a lot of resources and remove a bunch of the constraints so that a lot of us could really focus on the people and not our P&Ls 24/7, right? I'm not asking for a gift. It doesn't have to be me, but I think somebody needs to do that, right? And in a way that puts equity at the forefront, right? That is inclusive by design, or terminates if it can't sustain that, and that we need to focus on supporting the people who are doing this work, right? And especially now, given the terror that's racing through so many of their lives at this time in history. So,
Just one closing question, and I'll do one quick question, and then I would love to hear your closing thoughts and any takeaways for our audience. But are you an optimist? Like, especially as we're finding ourselves surrounded by negative news that are often in a direction that at best we don't agree with or resonate with, or if we're looking at the erosion of DEI and in a trajectory that was really troubling. How do you feel going forward? And how do we make sure individually, collectively, that we don't lose our ability to imagine, that we just don't shut down with all the, and then to the point, for me personally and a collective of us, that we even have structure so that we won't deal with negative news at late at night because it interferes with our sleep. So we will put in a bucket that we individually or collectively step into intentionally so that it's not disruptive. And I'm just wondering, are you an optimist? How do you deal with that? And then closing, are there any additional thoughts that you want to leave our audience with as takeaways?
yeah, I consider myself an optimist, but I also have a lot of dread at the moment, and I feel it. And maybe being the youngest of 7 kids, I am responsible for hiding a lot of those emotions. I think that's part of it's a feature of me that's not always so healthy, but I definitely feel it. I feel the concern, but I also feel it I feel the duty to our team. Like if I'm going to be the CEO, then I need to be accountable for managing that. Because if I'm going to be here in service, then I better do my part, right? And I have I'm very blessed to have an incredible support network in my partner and Lena and her family. I really I am privileged beyond any measure of expectation, and that's not lost on me. So that affords me an easier entrance into optimism. I forgot the second part, Alex. What was the second piece?
So whether or not you have any takeaways for like closing thoughts as
Yeah.
we're leaving the conversation.
I just remembered this piece that I was going to mention, which is I heard, and I wish I could remember the source, and maybe there's a famous person that said this, but you're each of us is accountable and has agency over who we give our attention to, and so now's a great time to decide who you're going to give your attention to. I will turn 49 in April of this year, and it's not lost on me that I'm probably past or maybe well past halftime. And so every minute counts. And so that isn't that I'm a fatalist, because my time will come just like all of ours, but I really want to make it matter. I want to make every day matter. And I know if anybody made it this far in the podcast today, I hope some did. It's there. I think there are so many things to be hopeful for, right? And physics and science tell us that there are reactions to actions. The pendulum will swing the other way, perhaps significantly. I hope in our lifetimes. I really hope in our lifetimes. I hope well sooner than the years that I have left after 48 and change. But I think there's a lot to be hopeful for. There are many challenges worth solving, and to the extent that we have agency to do that, I think we should keep at it and keep being relentless.
I thank you. I love that, that quote. I actually typed it in ChatGPT to do a search. Who said this quote? Each of us is accountable over who we give our attention to. And it gave me Naval Rabbit, William James, a psychologist. Probably it's none of them, right? None of them come to mind. I want to thank you, Dan, for this engaging conversation. I think it's Alex would agree that we would like to have you back to continue and just keep going a little bit deeper in other areas that we didn't cover. And I just want to thank also the audience for listening, and also everybody to please follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you see us. Until next time.
Yeah, it's a privilege to spend some time with both of you. I wish I could ask you all the same questions and get your answers. So we'll have to invert this at some point. And to all of those of you who are out there doing the hard work, thank you for what you do. We're grateful, and we'll do our part too.